When a quiet human engineer and his vulpine corker survive a near disaster aboard a massive orbital station, one small instinctive gesture changes everything. If you enjoy stories of quiet love, sci-fi worlds, and bonds that defy species, subscribe and join us for more tales like this one. The orbital ring drifted in silence above the ochre storms of the gas giant, its hull lit by the slow pulse of warning lights. Sparks showered from distant welding rigs, falling like tiny meteors into the dark. Inside one of the maintenance bays, a man in a scuffed engineering jacket leaned over an open relay core, the blue light painting faint lines across his face. Rowan Vale preferred the sound of tools to conversation. He worked with a kind of practiced solitude, every motion deliberate, every breath in time with the hum of the machinery around him. Across from him, perched on a scaffold with one knee tucked up, was Salon, the vulpine engineer everyone on the shipyard talked about, but few really knew. Her furt-tipped ears flicked toward every sound, and her red hair shimmered in the light like molten copper. They didn't speak much, not yet. Just the occasional exchange over schematics, shared silences filled with the thrum of power conduits, and the faint scent of coolant in the air. When she worked, Selin hummed a strange melodic tune that didn't match any Earth song Rowan had ever heard. It wasn't distracting, though. It was steady, focused, the sound of someone comfortable with the chaos of creation. And maybe that was why he looked up when she stopped humming. Their eyes met for just a second through the faint haze of plasma smoke. The noise of the world faded. For the first time in weeks, Rohan realized how quiet the station could be. He didn't know it then, but that moment, two engineers, a human and a vulpine, surrounded by the echo of their own breathing, was the first small shift in an orbit neither of them would escape. The morning cycle began with the soft flicker of artificial dawn, a wash of pale gold light creeping across the steel corridors of Arrivo's station. It was a quiet rotation day, the kind where nothing major broke, and the crew's chatter filled the walkways like static. Rowan Vale, like those mornings best. No alarms, no emergency welds, no explosions waiting to happen. Just time to work. His boots clanked lightly against the grating as he entered Bay for Tubi. The maintenance sector assigned to him and Saloon. She was already there, of course. Saloon stood on the upper scaffolding, tail flicking in rhythm with the hum of her plasma torch. Her orange eyes glowed faintly against the light as she glanced down. "You're late," she said, voice calm, but teasing. Rohan checked his chrono. "Shift starts in 4 minutes." "Exactly," she replied, flipping off the torch and leaning on the railing. "You should arrive early." "The plasma coils prefer punctuality." He grinned faintly. "Right. I'll remember to apologize to them next time." A soft sound escaped her, half laugh, half exhale. It was strange how she could make even that sound mechanical and musical at once. The Vulpines were known for it, the way emotion woven into tone and body language. Every flick of her ears, every twitch of her tail carried meaning. Humans often missed it. Rowan didn't. He dropped his toolkit beside hers and crouched near the open relay. "All right, what's the issue?" "Feedback loop in the conversion array," Saloon said, crouching beside him. "Keeps blowing the power coupling. We replaced it twice yesterday, but the frequency distortion still spiking. Sounds like a calibration drift. I'll run diagnostics." She passed him a microp probe without being asked. Their fingers brushed. Neither spoke about it, but her ears twitched once before she turned away to check the conduit readings. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It had its own rhythm, punctuated by soft beeps and the whir of tools. He liked that about her. She didn't fill the air with words unless they mattered. "Your calibration sequence," she murmured after a while, glancing at his datapad. "It's slower than mine." "Accuracy over speed," Rowan replied. "That's what slow people say." He glanced up. She was smirking, barely. He hadn't seen her smile before. Not really. The corner of his mouth tugged upward despite himself. "And here I thought Vulpines respected patience. We respect results." A moment passed. Then, almost grudgingly, she added, "Though your method did stabilize the coupling." "Did it now? Don't let it go to your head." They worked until the false noon lighting cycled overhead, the bay now smelling faintly of scorched circuitry. When the relay finally pulsed steady green, Rowan leaned back with a sigh. They're stable, probably for more than a day. This time, Selin tilted her head, considering the readout. "You say that like optimism is a weakness." He wiped sweat from his brow with a rag. "It's experience." She handed him a sealed canteen. "Then maybe you've had too much of it." The drink was cold, metallic-tasting water, filtered but never fresh. He took a sip, watching her carefully reassemble the relay housing. She didn't rush. Every movement was efficient, exacting, almost ceremonial. Her tail swayed in slow arcs as she focused, reflecting the light like a ribbon of living copper. He found himself wondering what that tail felt like. The thought startled him. He shook it off immediately. He was an engineer, not a poet. Selin straightened, dusted off her gloves, and nodded toward the viewport at the far end of the bay. "Shift's half over? Want to take the break up there?" "Sure," he said, packing up the tools. "I could use real light." The viewport was narrow, set deep into the hull, overlooking the roaring storms of the gas giant below. From here, the entire sky seemed alive, bands of gold, violet, and crimson swirling endlessly. The reflection of those colors shimmered in Selin's eyes as she stood there quietly mesmerized. "Do you ever get used to that?" Rowan asked. "No," she said simply. "Where I grew up, the skies were forests, canopies so dense they hid the stars. When I first saw open sky, I couldn't sleep for a week." He smiled faintly. "I had the opposite. Earth's sky is wide open, but I worked underground. Now I miss ceilings." She looked at him sideways. "Then we're both misplaced." "Guess so." Silence again, but this time it was warmer, shared, not empty. The hum of the station faded beneath the low growl of the planet's storms. "You work differently," she said finally. "Most humans talk while they work. You don't? I listen better that way." He thought about it, then nodded toward the relay across the bay. "Machines hum when they're content. When they're not, they whine. You can hear the difference if you're quiet." Salium considered that, then smiled softly. "You treat them like living things, don't you?" She looked down at her hands, fingertips marked faintly with soot. "I suppose I do." When the shift bell chimed, she didn't move right away. Neither did he. Eventually she turned, gathering her tools, but not before her tail brushed lightly against his arm as she passed. It was barely contact, an accidental touch maybe, but it sent a faint warmth through him that lingered long after she was gone. As the bay lights dimmed to evening hue, Rowan realized something unexpected. He wasn't just looking forward to the next shift because of the work. He was looking forward to her. The following week, Rowan started arriving early. He told himself it was to recalibrate the diagnostic grid before Salim got there, or to finish the reports that piled up faster than the station's printers could handle. But when he heard her humming echoing down the corridor, soft, steady, unmistakably her, he always caught himself smiling before he even saw her. Today, she was crouched beneath an exposed panel, tail flicking lazily as sparks hissed out in tiny bursts. The smell of burnt insulation hung in the air. "You're going to melt your ears off," he called. "They're hit-resistant," she replied, muffled by the conduit. Unlike your patience, he leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "I have plenty of patience. You test it daily." Her head popped out from under the panel, eyes gleaming with mischief. "Then you should thank me for keeping it in shape." Rowan snorted, but couldn't hide his grin. He handed her a coolant sprayer without a word. She accepted it with a flick of her ear, her people's version of a nod. They worked side by side for hours, slipping into the kind of wordless synchronization that only comes from trust. He handed tools before she asked. She anticipated his measurements without needing explanation. The job went twice as fast as scheduled, which meant, for the first time in weeks, they had the luxury of boredom. Selin perched on a crate, sipping from her canteen. "You humans have the strangest ideas of recreation," she said. "Such as," Rowan asked, wiping grease from his hands. "You schedule fun. Time off, time on, time for laughter. It's all compartmentalized, my people. We chase it when we find it. That's called procrastination. That's called living." She countered with a grin. Her tail swished lightly across the floor. Lazy, unguarded. He found it hypnotic, like a pendulum marking a rhythm he couldn't quite follow. Later that day, an equipment malfunction in another bay had the two of them summoned to assist. The job was messy. A cracked plasma conduit spraying superheated vapor. Most of the crew stayed clear until pressure stabilized. Rohan and Saloon didn't have that luxury. "I'll handle the bypass," she said, voice steady, but clipped. "Negative," Rowan replied, tightening his gloves. "You're smaller. If this thing kicks, you'll be vapor." I'm faster, she countered, baring her teeth slightly. Doesn't matter. I've got the longer reach. Her ears flattened. Always the hero, he smirked. Always the engineer. Before she could argue, he stepped forward, clamping the valve with a metal armature. The vapor hissed against his sleeve, the heat searing through fabric. He gritted his teeth, holding it steady until Saloon rerouted power. The conduit hissed once, then fell silent. The silence was deafening. Saloon darted to him immediately, grabbing his wrist. You're burned, she said sharply. Nothing serious, he muttered, but she was already guiding him to the nearest wash station. Her touch was precise but gentle, claws never scratching the skin. The cold water hit his arm, sending a shock through his nerves. She murmured something under her breath in her native tongue. Low, melodic, almost like a lullaby. What's that? He asked softly. An old word, she replied, glancing up. Means stay whole. My mother used to say it. He met her eyes. She'd approve of you patching humans then. Her lips curved faintly. Only the ones too stubborn to avoid trouble. He chuckled, letting the tension fade. She wrapped his arm in a cool gel dressing, then stepped back. The proximity they'd shared hung between them. A strange electricity either could name. Thanks, he said. Don't thank me, she murmured, turning away. I was worried. There was no teasing in her voice this time. Just honesty. Rowan hesitated, then reached out, almost without thinking, and tapped the back of her glove. For the record, I worry too. Her ears flicked upward, tail going still. She didn't move for a few seconds, then nodded once quietly. Then we'll keep each other intact. They finished the repairs before shift's end, logging the final reports together. When they left the bay, the station's artificial sunset was fading into the violet hue of night cycle. Selin paused at the intersection. There's a supply deck cafe, she said suddenly. They serve something close to coffee. Have you tried it? Rowan raised an eyebrow. You're inviting me to coffee. I'm inviting you to test liquid caffeine stability for humans and Vulpites, she said too quickly. He smiled. Lead the experiment then. The cafe was little more than a converted cargo alcove with a counter and a few worn tables. The lights were soft, the hum of the reactor distant. Saloon ordered a cup of Marin leaf brew, something earthy and aromatic. Rowan took the closest thing to black coffee they had. They sat across from each other, the silence easy. She leaned back, eyes half-lidded, ears twitching with every passing voice outside. I've worked beside humans before, she said eventually. You're different. Different how? You don't look at me like I'm exotic or dangerous. You look like you're just curious. He nodded slowly. Because I am. Curiosity built half the things in this galaxy. She smiled. A real one this time. Soft, genuine. Then maybe that's why I don't mind you being around. Rowan pretended to focus on his drink, but his chest felt warm in a way that had nothing to do with the coffee. When they left, the corridor outside was nearly empty. As they walked, Saloon brushed her fingers across the metal wall, an unconscious habit, feeling the vibration of the station's pulse. Good night, Saloon, he said when they reached the junction. She hesitated, tail swaying once behind her. Good night, Rowan Vale. It was the first time she'd said his full name aloud. The sound of it in her voice lingered with him all the way back to his quarters. The next rotation, Selin appeared at his workstation before he did. She disassembled half the array they'd been scheduled to recalibrate. Tools spread out in neat concentric circles around her. When Rowan entered, still carrying his morning thermos, she looked up and flicked an ear. You're late, she said again. He checked his chrono. By 20 seconds, I measured, she replied, deadpan. It was 32. Rohan laughed quietly, setting down his thermos. Fine, guess I'll have to make it up to you. You could start by holding that panel steady, she said, gesturing with a spanner. He joined her without another word. The hum of machinery rose around them, steady and rhythmic. Outside the bay's V-port, the gas giant turned slowly, its storms rolling in endless motion. Working with her had become second nature now. He didn't need to ask what tools she wanted. He could tell by the way her ears shifted or the tone of her hum. She didn't need to explain a calculation, one glance at her stylus markings, and he could follow her logic. 2 hands, 2 minds, 1 flow. During a break, she sat cross-legged on the floor, tail curling around her knees. You humans have a habit of naming everything, she said. Why? Rowan leaned back against the crate. Makes things feel less temporary, I guess. Saloon's gaze softened. Then what would you name this place? The Arivos Ring. He glanced around the bay. Probably something boring. Sector 9 Maintenance Hub. That's not a name, she said, smirking. That's a label. He shrugged. We're practical. You're unimaginative. He grinned. You got a better idea? She looked at the relay core they'd been repairing for weeks, its faint glow illuminating their faces. The heart chamber, she said softly. Rowan blinked. The what? It hums like one, she said, ears twitching toward the sound. Beats, slows. When it stops, everything dies. He stared at her for a long moment. That's actually kind of poetic. She smiled faintly. Don't sound so surprised. That night, their assignment changed. The two were tasked with a 3-day diagnostic run on an outer hull relay. An isolated section, exposed to vacuum, accessible only through an airlock corridor, seldom used except by maintenance crews. They prepped gear in silence, checked seals, calibrated tools. Rohan noticed she handled the vacuum harness like ritual. Each motion deliberate, symmetrical. You'll always do that before a job, he asked. She glanced up, ears flicking. Superstition, a blessing for balance. My people believe symmetry wards off case. And does it work? Her eyes glimmered behind the visor. You're still alive, aren't you? He chuckled, pulling his helmet into place. Guess I'll let you keep blessing the missions then. They cycled through the airlock, the hiss of pressure loss fading into silence. Outside the station stretched vast and skeletal, a glimmering crescent against the gas giant's swirling clouds. Their suit lights cut narrow cones through the darkness as they moved along the hull. Selen's movements were graceful, her tail coiling for balance even in zero gravity. Rowan was slower, methodical, checking each tether twice. She teased him over the comms. You trust the math more than the universe. That math saved my life more than once, he replied. So has luck, she countered. He smiled beneath his helmet. Maybe that's your domain. By the second shift, they'd set up a small diagnostic outpost in the whole alcove. Between power checks and system calibrations, they shared ration packs and stories. Rowan talked about his first ship job, how he'd accidentally fried a Kome by misreading voltage. Saloon told him about learning to weld by scent, how Vulpine engineers trained to detect ionization levels in metal just by the smell. That's incredible, he said. Humans need readouts for that. She shrugged lightly. Different tools, same purpose. When she smiled, the faint glow from her faceplate caught her fur in gold and crimson. At one point, while they floated side by side near the viewport panel, she asked, Why did you come here, Rowan Vale? He hesitated. Because the pay was good. Because I didn't want to stay on Earth. Because fixing things makes more sense than fixing people. She tilted her head, studying him through the glass. And yet you keep trying anyway. He gave a small, helpless laugh. Maybe I just like impossible projects. Selland turned back toward the stars, voice softer now. Then perhaps you understand us better than most. When they returned to the main bay, something between them had shifted. Subtle, invisible, but undeniable. They worked closer now, shoulders brushing more often than before. He'd catch her sense sometimes, something faintly metallic, floral, and wild. When she laughed, it wasn't guarded anymore. One evening, they shared a meal on the catwalk, the glow of the gas giant painting their faces in violet light. Rowan told a joke about tearing gravity regulators, and Saloon actually choked on her drink, laughing. Don't make me do that again, she said, wiping her eyes. Didn't know you could laugh like that, he said, still smiling. I didn't either. The quiet that followed wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. Later, when they cleaned up, Rowan's hand brushed hers as he passed the day. She froze mid-motion. Her tail gave a startled twitch, brushing lightly against his leg before curling away. She turned aside, ears lowered. Apologies, she murmured. That was reflex. Rowan shook his head gently. Don't apologize. It's fine. Her eyes darted up to his. You don't understand. For my kind tail contact is, she stopped struggling for the word intimate, unconscious. It means trust or more. He blinked, then smiled softly. Then I'll take it as trust. She looked at him for a long moment, searching his expression. Finally, she nodded once, tail swaying slowly behind her. Then we understand each other. That night, Rowan lay in his bunk, staring at the dim lights overhead, listening to the distant hum of the ship's core. He tried to convince himself it was just friendship, just the quiet bond between two people who had learned to rely on each other. But when he closed his eyes, he saw her laughing against the violet glow, her tail brushing his leg in that accidental moment of warmth. And he knew it wasn't just that anymore. The days that followed blurred into rhythm. Work, banter, repairs, coffee, shared silence. The pattern of their partnership became as natural as breathing. Rohan found that he could sense Selen's presence even before she spoke, the faint rustle of her movement. It will remind you to move in rhythm even when you work alone. Do you really think I'll get assigned to another partner after you? Her ears twitched upward, amused. You sound confident. I'm not, he admitted. I'm hopeful. For a heartbeat, she froze, then looked away, pretending to check a readout. Her tail flicked side to side in short, uncertain arcs. Hope, she murmured, is a dangerous tool. It breaks easily if used without care. Then I'll handle it gently. That earned him the faintest smile, and she returned to work, though her ears remained angled toward him the rest of the shift. Their next assignment took them into the outer corridors again, one of the older maintenance wings that still carried the echo of earlier construction. The air was cooler here, lights dimmer, the hum of generators distant. As they worked, Selen began to talk more about her people's customs. Vulpine stone have written vows, she explained while sealing a plasma weld. We express loyalty through acts of service, building, mending, protecting. The way we hold things matters more than what we say about them. Rowan nodded thoughtfully. That explains a lot. She looked at him. Does it? You fix everyone's mistakes without complaint. That's not duty. It's devotion. She paused, ears flicking, the weld light fading. And you notice hard not to. He said it simply, but it hung in the air like something heavier than words. They didn't talk for a while after that. They didn't need to. That evening, the artificial storm warning system activated. A standard procedure for magnetic flare alignment, but it meant closing off half the bay and sealing outer access. Rowan and Saloon volunteered to stay behind, monitoring power flow. As the station entered storm lockdown, the lights dimmed to red. The hum of the cord deepened into a low thrumming. They sat side by side on the catwalk, backs against the railing, the bay cast in soft crimson glow. Selen's voice broke the quiet. You ever feel small? Rohan raised an eyebrow, standing next to a planet that could swallow us whole. Every day, she shook her head slightly. Not that kind of small, the kind that makes you wonder if the things you do matter at all. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, if it matters to one person, it matters. Her eyes turned to him bright in the red light. And you? He smiled faintly. You count. Her ears lowered in surprise. I didn't ask to, didn't have to. She stared at him, unblinking, and something unspoken passed between them. Something older than language, deeper than logic. Outside, the storms raged in silence. Inside, she reached down slowly, carefully, and took his burned arm, the one she treated weeks ago, turning it over in her hands. Her fingers brushed the faint scar. You healed, she said softly. Mostly good, she murmured, releasing his arm gently. I wouldn't forgive myself if you hadn't. A klaxon blared suddenly, jolting both of them upright. Power readings spiked across the monitor. Main capacitors fluctuating, Rowan said, running diagnostics. Stabilizer grids offline, Saloon muttered. Manual overrides jammed. They moved as one, grabbing tools, crossing the walkway to the relay core. The hum grew louder, pitch rising dangerously. On 3, Rowan shouted over the noise. 1, Selen anchored the panel. 2, sparks showered across the floor. 3, they slammed the breaker switch together. The hum cut instantly, plunging the bay into stillness. For several seconds, Scyther moved. Benelin let out a shaky laugh. We did it. Rohan leaned against the panel, breathing hard. You all right? I should be asking you that, she said, stepping closer. Your pulse is elevated, he chuckled. Yours too. Her ears flicked. I have excellent hearing, you know. I'm counting on it. They stood there close enough to feel each other's warmth despite the cooling air. When she finally exhaled, it came out as something almost like a purr, low and unguarded. Her tail flicked once, brushing his leg lightly. She froze but didn't move away. Rowan's voice was barely a whisper. Saloon. She looked up, eyes wide, glowing amber under the emergency lights. Whatever she saw in his face made her tail still completely. Then, in a trembling voice, she said, "Rowan Vale, I think I understand why you come early now." He smiled, heart-pounding. "Guess I stopped pretending it was about work." Her ears folded back shilly, and she whispered, "Then maybe I'll stop pretending not to notice." The bay lights flickered, power stabilizing once more, and their shadows merged against the wall, to silhouettes side by side in perfect rhythm. Morning on a Vivo station wasn't sunlight. It was a system cycle. A soft wash of artificial warmth flowed through the corridors, the hum of generators rising like the ship's heartbeat. But to Rowan Vale that morning felt different. The light seemed sharper, the air thinner. Every sound magnified by the weight of what lingered between them after last night. He arrived early again, as always, but Saloon was already there. She stood near the open relay console, hands clasped behind her back, tail coiled loosely around one leg. When she looked up, her expression was calm. Too calm. "Morning," he said, setting his toolkit down. "Morning," she echoed. It should have felt normal. It didn't. They worked in perfect sync, as always, passing tools, running calibrations, aligning the data flow. But the silence between them wasn't the easy quiet they'd known before. It had tension now, like a string drawn tight between two notes that refused to resolve. Every time their hands brushed, her ears flicked. Every time she leaned close, he caught himself holding his breath. Rowan focused on the numbers, the readings, anything but the sound of her voice or the faint warmth of her standing near. Selen, for her part, was quieter than usual. No humming, no jokes, only the faint swish of her tail against the deck now and then. Restless, as though her instincts didn't know what to do with themselves. They moved through the maintenance bay, checking relay after relay. When she crouched to inspect a coupling, he knelt beside her, their shoulders nearly touching. She angled the scanner toward him, their hands brushing over the same control pad. Her claws tapped the glass surface once before freezing mid. The glow from the panel reflected in her eyes, a soft holographic shimmer that made them look like tiny twin stars. Rowan found himself staring, caught by the play of colors within her pupils, the faint pulse of light that wasn't just machine reflection, but something alive beneath. For a long second, either of them spoke. The sound of the reactor faded, leaving only the low hum of the station and the twin rhythms of their breathing. She turned her head slightly, and suddenly they were face to face, so close he could see the faint iridescence in the fur at her temples. Could trace the flicker of blue light across the curve of her cheek. Selen's gaze didn't waver. There was a question in it, maybe the same one pounding in his chest. He knew she could probably hear it. The accelerated thump of his heartbeat echoing through the small space between them. Vulpine hearing was sharp. She could pick up the faintest vibration in a cooling pipe. And right now, he was sure his pulse sounded like a drum. Her ears twitched faintly just once, a tell. Then her expression softened, and color flushed beneath her fur. A faint bloom of deeper gold along her cheeks. Selen blinked, inhaled sharply, and turned away in one swift motion. The relay modulation stable," she said quickly, tapping at her datapad with unnecessary urgency. "We can finish the next sequence early." Rohan blinked, still frozen in place, trying to force his heart rate to slow. Focus, tools, work, anything but the image of her eyes or the memory of that flicker of warmth between them. He cleared his throat. "Good, that'll make the systems lead happy." "Yes," she said briskly. "Efficiency is important," he smirked faintly. "You just want to beat your own record again." Her tail flicked behind her. Perhaps the tension eased slightly, but only on the surface. Beneath the rhythm of work, the silence was full of unspoken things, questions either dared to ask. They spent the next few hours in perfect professional form, their movements synchronized as though nothing unusual had happened. Yet Rowan couldn't ignore how often her tail brushed near him. Close enough to feel its faint static in the air, never quite touching. She caught herself doing it once and tucked it around her leg, pretending to examine a sensor readout. He bit back a smile, pretending not to notice. When they finally paused for a break, Selen stood by the viewport, watching the planet storms churn below. "The patterns change every hour," she murmured. "No matter how stable they seem, they always shift." Rowan leaned beside her, hands resting on the railing. "Guess it's the same with people." Her ears flicked toward him. "You think we changed that quickly?" "I think," he said, "sometimes you wake up and realize you'll never see someone quite the same way again." She didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed fixed on the planet's surface, the swirling ribbons of gold and crimson reflected in her gaze. "That sounds frightening." "It can be," Rowan admitted, "or it can mean you're finally seeing clearly." Saloon turned her head, studying him. For a heartbeat, the atmosphere shifted again. Electric, intimate, fragile. Then she smiled faintly and looked away. "You're far too poetic for a mechanic." I blamed the company. Her tail twitched once behind her, betraying her amusement. "Then perhaps you should file a complaint. I'll send it to your department." She laughed quietly, the sound soft and genuine. It broke the tension just enough to breathe again. Still, as they returned to work, the memory of that near contact lingered. Rowan caught himself glancing at her reflection in the console glass. The faint glow among her kind wasn't marked by gifts of wealth or status, but by creation. A Vulpine's heart was shown through what they made, something unique, imperfect, touched by hand and intent. So he made something. In his quarters, hunched over a bench of spare parts, he spent hours shaping thin scrap metal into a pendant, rough but honest, 2 interlocking spirals, one slightly smaller than the other, forged together at the center, a pattern that, according to the article, symbolized mutual rhythm. He nicked his thumb twice. The edges weren't smooth. The spirals were uneven. It didn't matter. He wasn't aiming for perfection. He just wanted her to know. When the morning came, he slipped the charm into his pocket, feeling the small weight of it against his leg like a second heartbeat. Saloon was already at work when he arrived. Her ears flicked up when she saw him. "You're early again, trying to beat your record," he said, setting down his tools. "Unlikely," she smiled faintly, turning back to the coolant intake system. "You humans rely on numbers too much. Feel the pulse instead." "Still haven't learned how to feel a machine yet," he replied, half distracted. "Then you listen wrong. Then teach me." She glanced at him over her shoulder, the faint shimmer of the coolant lights painting her face blue. Maybe one day. It was an ordinary start to an ordinary shift. They worked in rhythm, calling out readings, trading tools without looking. He laughed at one of her dry jokes about human stubbornness, and she pretended to sigh when he miscalculated a heat ratio on purpose, just to hear her scold him. But beneath the laughter, his heart wouldn't slow down. The charm in his pocket felt heavier every minute. He waited for the right moment. When the tension eased, when they were alone, when her tail brushed close enough that he could reach for her hand without trembling, it never came. By late shift, they were recalibrating the coolant module, a massive cylindrical core that kept the ship's reactor bays at safe temperature. It wasn't complex work, but it was delicate. A mistimed adjustment could throw the coolant pressure off balance, and the mix inside was volatile. Saloon crouched near the access panel, ears flicking. "Do you hear that?" she murmured. Rohan listened. "Just a normal hum." "No," she said, voice low. "Something's off. The vibration, it's wrong." He frowned, stepping closer. "Could be resonance drift, could be danger," she said simply. Before he could reply, a soft hiss echoed through the bay. Then another, a low whine built from deep within the coolant reservoir, rising into a sharp pitch that made the hair on Rowan's arms stand up. "Pressure spiking," he said quickly, checking the readout. "That's not possible. It's not even." The console flashed red. Saloon reacted first. "Get back." She leaped for the shutoff valve, her movements a blur. But the coolant chamber's inner seal glowed white-hot, vaporizing the nearby plating. The wave of heat hit like a sudden wind, invisible but brutal. Rowan's instincts kicked in. Salon, she turned just as the containment panel buckled. The heat wash rolled outward, fast enough to warp the air itself. She stumbled backward, foot catching her open toolbox. Metal clattered across the floor, and she went down hard, right in the line of fire. Time slowed. Rowan didn't think. He moved. He lunged across the platform, the world narrowing to the flash of light and the shape of her falling. His body hit hers hard enough to knock the breath from his lungs, driving them both to the deck, behind a bulkhead as the coolant wave burst overhead in a shimmer of scorching mist. For a moment, everything was white noise, steam, pressure alarms, the roar of venting gas. Then the emergency seals slammed shut with a heavy metallic thunk. "Silence!" Rowan blinked through the haze. The smell of burning coolant thickened the air. He felt her beneath him, warm, trembling alive. Selen's wide eyes stared up at him. her pupils dilated, chest rising and falling rapidly. For a heartbeat, either moved, the adrenaline hadn't faded yet. It flooded his veins, making his pulse pound in his ears. He could feel her breath against his neck, fast and shallow. Her hands gripped his sleeves. They just stared at each other, still half in shock, half trying to understand that they were both still here. Finally, Selin swallowed hard. Her voice was barely audible. You could have been burned." "So could you," he said, his own voice rough. Her tail twitched beneath him, coiling slightly, then stilling. Neither spoke again. The alarms had gone silent, but the echo of the explosion still hung in the air like static. Rowan realized how close they were. His hands still braced against the floor beside her shoulders, her face only inches away. Her fur was dusted with ash and coolant residue. Her lips parted slightly as she tried to catch her breath. The faint shimmer of holographic light danced across her eyes again, reflecting his face. He didn't move, couldn't. The world outside didn't matter anymore. He was still processing what had just happened, how close she'd been to real danger, how icily he could have lost her. Saloon exhaled slowly, her voice trembling but steadying. "You didn't think?" He gave a shaky laugh. "No time to." Her fingers flexed against his sleeve. "That's very human. Is that bad?" Her ears lowered slightly. "Not this time." For a long suspended moment, either moved, only the sound of their breathing filled the space. Two hearts hammering in sync, Rowan knew he should get up. The coolant system needed recalibration. The seals needed inspection. The supervisor would demand a report, but none of that felt real compared to the weight of her beneath him, the pulse of her life against his chest and the unspoken truth hanging between them like the faint aftershock of something inevitable. He finally whispered, barely trusting his voice. "You okay?" Saloon's gaze softened, the panic fading into something else, something that made his chest ache. "I am now," she said. The emergency lights flickered above them, painting the scene in faint gold. Either of them moved, not yet. The silence stretched. Only the hum of the emergency lights and the hiss of the cooling vents filled the bay. Rowan could still feel the pulse pounding through his wrists, the weight of Saloon beneath him, faint scent of scorched metal, and her warmth cutting through it. Then he noticed something, a pressure around his forearm, soft, firm, rhythmic. He looked down, blinking through the haze. Her tail had coiled tightly around his arm, the sleek red fur trembling slightly with tension. It wasn't just resting there. It was holding him wound close in an instinctive protective loop. He stared for a moment, then followed the line of it back up to her body. Saloon's eyes widened, following his gaze, and when she realized what he was looking at, the color rushed into her face in a flood of gold and crimson. Her ears shot up straight. "I stars above," she stammered, the words tumbling over themselves. "It's instinct, I didn't." "I wasn't." Rowan blinked, still half dazed. "Sillin, it's okay." She tried to untangle her tail only to make it tighten reflexively. No, this you don't understand. This isn't salient," he said again softly this time. Her words faltered. The air between them was trembling now, alive with a kind of quiet where only truth could fit. He raised his unbound hand slowly, brushing a strand of her red hair away from her face. "You don't have to explain it," he murmured. "I understand." Her breathing hitched. "You do," he nodded, his voice a little unsteady, "because I was about to do something just as impulsive." Selin blinked, confusion flickering through her wide amber eyes. Then she saw his hand moving toward his jacket pocket. He hesitated for just a heartbeat, then pulled it free, a small, uneven charm glinting faintly under the emergency light. Her gaze locked on it immediately. The air seemed to leave the room. "I wanted to give you this," Rowan said quietly. "All day I kept waiting for the right moment, but I think," he gave a small, nervous laugh. "The universe just made one." Her lips parted slightly. "You made that?" He nodded. "Last night? It's rough, I know, but it's meant to be." Her eyes shimmered, the light catching on the edges of the tears gathering there. "Rowan, do you know what this pattern means?" "I do," he said softly. "Mutual rhythm, connection. I wanted it to be you and me." For a second, either breathed. Then, her tail gave a faint shiver and tightened around his arm again, firmer this time, not restraint. "Something else." She reached up slowly, her hand trembling, and touched the charm with her fingertips. "No one has ever made this for me before," she whispered. He smiled, voice low and rough. "Then I'll be the first," Selin let out. A small, shaky laugh through the tears that now streaked the fur at her cheeks. "You shouldn't. You don't even realize what you've done." It's how she stopped herself, swallowed hard, and looked back into his eyes. "It means bond," she said finally, voice barely audible. "For us, it means choice." "You chose me," Rohan nodded once, sure and steady. "Yeah, I did." Her eyes softened, glimmering with something deeper than surprise. She tugged gently on her tail, but instead of freeing him, she drew him closer. The movement was slow, deliberate, her tail pulling his arm inward until his chest brushed hers. "Then I should answer properly," she murmured. He barely had time to breathe before she closed the distance, her lips pressing to his. The world dissolved. The hum of the ship faded into nothing, the red emergency light bathing them in warmth, as the tension between them melted into something real, something alive. Her hand slid up to his shoulder, her other resting against his chest, as if to steady the storm she'd started. Rowan kissed her back carefully at first, then fully, all the fear and adrenaline spilling into that. Above flickered back to white as the emergency systems reset, but neither of them moved. They stayed there, still tangled together on the workshop floor, the charm resting between them, her tail looped tightly around his arm as if sealing a promise older than either of their worlds. Outside, the ship hummed back to life, unaware that something far quieter and far more important had just begun. The warmth of the moment was still settling between them when the bay doors hissed open. A burst of heavy boots and shouted voices cut through the haze of quiet. "Bay 42, we heard an explosion. What's your status?" Rohan blinked toward the sound, still half dazed. Selin froze beneath him, ears snapping upright. They both turned their heads just in time to see 3 maintenance officers spill through the doorway, flashlights sweeping the scorched floor. The lead officer, a broad-shouldered human in a yellow hazard vest, stopped mid-stride when the light landed on them. His brows drew together. What in all the words died in his throat. Rowan realized belatedly how this must look. He and Saloon were still on the ground, tangled together, her tail wrapped tight around his arm, their faces far too close. His jacket was half open, her fur still dusted with ash and coolant residue. The charm lay glinting between them like an incriminating piece of evidence. Rowan managed, voice cracking slightly. "We can explain." Saloon scrambled to her feet faster than he thought physically possible, tail uncoiling with a whip-like flick. There was pressure buildup, coolant instability. He pulled me clear. "I tackled her," Rowan said at the same time, still kneeling, realizing how unhelpful that sounded. I mean, to get her out of the ER heatwave behind the officer, one of the younger texts turned red, trying to hide a grin. The other bit, his lips so hard it looked painful. The officer pinched the bridge of his nose. "So, let me get this straight." He gestured vaguely to the mess of scorch plating and scattered tools. The coolant valve explodes. The alarm doesn't trip properly, and somehow this ends with you two doing whatever this is on my deck floor. Sincere, folded flat. "It's not," Rohan cut in quickly. "Strictly professional accident." "Sir?" One of the texts behind the officer snorted audibly. The officer turned slowly toward him. "Turl, if you value your next shift rotation, don't." The young man snapped to attention, face still twitching with suppressed laughter. The officer sighed and looked back at Rohan and Saloon. His tone softened, just barely. "You'd hurt?" Rowan shook his head. "Just bruised pride." Sin straightened, brushing sod off her clothes. "No burns. We're fine." "Good," the officer said. "Then go get cleaned up and file an incident report before I have to explain to command why 2 of my best engineers nearly boiled themselves alive over a faulty coolant line." "Yes, sir," they said in unison. He waved them off with a weary hand. As they turned toward the exit, his voice echoed behind them, rising sharply into his calm mic. "No, I don't care whose fault it is. Replace that entire coolant assembly before it cooks half the ring again. And someone tell logistics to check those pressure sensors, or so help me." The door slid shut behind them, cutting off the rest of his tirade. For a moment, the hallway was blissfully quiet again. Rowan and Selin walked side by side, the echo of their footsteps filling the space. Then Rohan glanced sideways at her, unable to help it. Her fur was still muss from the blast, her cheeks flushed. And despite her best effort to look composed, the corners of her mouth were twitching. When she finally looked at him, they both burst out laughing. It wasn't polite laughter. It was breathless, helpless, full-bodied laughter that echoed down the corridor until their sides hurt. Every time one of them tried to stop, the other's grin set it off again. Professional accident. Saloon managed between gasps, her tail swishing wildly. "That's what you're going with." He wiped his eyes, still laughing. I panicked. "You try explaining that to your boss while sitting on the floor like that." Her ears flicked back in mock indignation. "Oh, don't you dare put this on me, human." Rohan grinned, holding up his hands in surrender. "Fine, fine. Equal blame." They slowed their pace as the laughter faded, but the warmth between them stayed. Their hands brushed briefly as they walked, and this time either pulled away. Saloon's tail swayed close to his leg, brushing just lightly enough to make sure he felt it. Rowan smiled to himself, still hearing their laughter echoing behind them, and somewhere deep in the ship's steady hum, he could have sworn the engines purred along in approval. By the next shift, everyone on the Arrivo's ring knew. It didn't matter that the official report only mentioned a minor coolant malfunction and successful emergency containment by engineers Vale and Sim. The crew had their own version, one that traveled faster than plasma through the conduits. By the time Rowan arrived at the maintenance hub, conversations hushed and smirks followed him down the aisle. He pretended not to notice, mostly because he'd walked in with Saloon beside him. Her fur was brushed smooth now, her uniform freshly cleaned. But there was still a faint scent of coolant in her hair that reminded him of the chaos the night before. She carried her toolkit as if nothing in the world had changed, except for the new charm hanging lightly from the chain around her neck. His charm, the one he made with trembling hands and a racing heart. She wore it openly. When they passed the main diagnostics table, one of the younger techs, Turl, the same one who nearly burst laughing last night, elbowed his partner and muttered, "Guess the coolant wasn't the only thing overheating." The other tech snorted quickly, covering it with a cough when Salon's amber eyes flicked toward them. Rowan didn't bother hiding his grin. Morning, Turl coolant system, still stable. The kids straightened immediately. "Why, yes, sir. Perfectly balanced." "Good," Rowan said. "Wouldn't want any more accidents." Salon's tail swished once, a quiet, amused gesture that only he caught. They worked as usual that day. Usual didn't mean the same anymore. She hummed while calibrating instruments. He matched her rhythm by tapping the side of the console in time. When they passed each other tools, her hand lingered just a fraction longer. Once, while leaning over a terminal, her tail brushed his arm again, deliberate this time. She didn't apologize for it. Neither did he. Around mid-shift, one of the senior techs, an old spacer named Derek, wandered by, chewing on a data stylus. "So," he said casually, "heard you two had a little fireworks show last night." Rowan didn't look up from his panel. All contained no injuries. Derek smirked. "That so looks like there might have been some sparks anyway." Sen's ears flicked sideways, but she kept her focus on the console. "If you're referring to the reactor overload, yes, there were." Derek chuckled and backed away, clearly satisfied with her answer and even more with her tone. When he was gone, Rohan glanced sideways at her. "You handled that well." "I've learned that ignoring gossip is faster than fighting it," she said. He smiled, practical as always. Her gaze softened. "I'm learning from you." The quiet between them felt different now, no longer edged with hesitation, but comfortable, grounded, intimate in a way that no rumor could touch. At the end of their shift, they stood together in the viewing corridor that wrapped the outer hall. Beyond the glass, the gas giant swirled in endless motion, ribbons of gold and crimson dancing beneath the stars. Saloon leaned her elbows on the railing, tail curling lazily around Rowan's wrist. He didn't mind the gesture anymore. He'd come to understand it for what it was, a silent declaration, a living bond. She turned her head toward him, eyes glowing faintly in the reflected starlight. "They'll keep talking for a while," she said softly. "Let them," he murmured. "They'll find something else soon enough. And if they don't, then they'll just have to get used to us." Selen smiled, looking back at the planet. "I like that answer." A minute passed before she spoke again, voice quieter now. "You know, among my people, once a tale chooses, it doesn't change." He looked at her. And yours chose me. Her tail gave a small, affectionate twitch. It decided before I did. He chuckled softly. Then I'm glad it's smarter than me. Sellen's laugh joined his warm and musical, filling the quiet of the corridor. When it faded, she leaned closer until her shoulder brushed his. Do you regret it? She asked suddenly. Saving you. She shook her head. Loving me? Rowan didn't hesitate. Not for a second. Her eyes closed for a heartbeat, and when they opened again, they shimmered with peace. The two of them stood together, watching the storms turn below. Two engineers who built more than ships, who repaired something far rarer, the bridge between two beating hearts. And as the station lights dimmed for night's cycle, Sellen's tail slipped around his hand again, not by instinct this time, but by choice. They both smiled. May they let go. Thank you for listening. If this story moved you, leave a like, share it with someone who'd appreciate it, and subscribe for more HFY sci-fi romances every day.